It's Thursday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster.
We are reducing the environmental requirements placed on developers so they can focus on getting things built and stop worrying about the bats and the newts.
But should wildlife be sacrificed on the altar of economic growth?
I think it's very unfair. We just think it's also unfair that they don't have the courtesy to speak to us about it.
Second homeowners in Wales pay a hefty premium on their council tax. A similar policy is coming to England.
Will the government do something to ensure that the population of this country is sustainable going forward?
And will immigration push the UK population to more than 72 million by 2032? Joining us today, Labour MP Kanishka Narayan, Shadow Community Secretary Kevin Hollinrake, Plaid Cymru leader Rhynap Iorwerth and journalist and broadcaster Dawn Neeson. This is Politics Live. Hello and welcome. Let's start with this headline in BBC News. Water bills to rise by £10 a month in April. In England and Wales, the average will be about £123 a year. It is apparently the largest rise since privatisation, and this is despite the higher than predicted figure by the regulator Ofwat. It's to pay broadly for ageing infrastructure and cut record sewage pollution. It will, of course, be a further squeeze on household incomes. Kanishka, starting with you, do consumers just have to accept it?
Well, Jo, I think consumers have to have the right ambition, which they do, which is that we need to fundamentally change the water infrastructure in this country, both to solve the immediate crisis on sewage, which is what we've been focused on through a water special measures bill passed into a third reading in Parliament now. But ultimately, long term, we need to make sure where we are putting more money into the system, those are ring-fenced for infrastructure, not spent on dividends.
Right, so they do just have to suck it up, really?
Well, I think it's not just a question of sucking up higher bills, it's a question of making sure when we are paying, we're paying into the right thing rather than for bonuses and dividends. That's what we're committed to doing. That's what we're delivering.
Right. Will consumers understand this, Dawn?
No. No, you don't even need to finish that sentence. You know, after 35 years of bonus scandals and sewage bills, water firms are now being rewarded with more money. Money that they claim to be in debt, but they still hand out huge bonuses to their boards and to their shareholders. I do not understand it. I mean, the last reservoir was built in this country in 1992. In fact, many water companies have been selling them off. So, yeah, suck it up because we're going to have to. I don't know what the alternative is. I mean, privatisation, neither of the main parties have suggested that in the past. So I don't know what the answer is. There's not much else we can do. We have to suck it up.
Right. Kevin, is that acceptable?
Well, we did change the rules so that Ofwat could stop the payment of dividends where there was underperformance, where there was storm overflows, for example, which I think is quite right, and where that performance isn't adequate, then it's not right that people are getting bonuses or dividends. But it's true to say we do need to invest in our infrastructure. It's creaking. A lot of it's been around for over 100 years. If people want to stop these overflows, going in, these sewage discharges into our rivers, into our seas, then it's right that those businesses have got to invest in that infrastructure. We increased the level of infrastructure spending, and we increased it again in terms of our plans. 88 billion now promised over the next few decades. Huge investment. It's right that they invest. That's got to be paid for somehow. Right.
I mean, it's a huge amount of money that does need to be invested, according to the regulator and to the water companies. But to take an example in Wales, I mean, Jo Coburn say that they're going to have the fourth highest increase, and this is a not-for-profit company.
Yeah, and I think the highest one in Hafren and Dyfrdwy, also in Wales. And this increase, you know, during still a cost of living crisis, is set against the background of billions and billions of pounds having been taken out in profit from water, which should it be in public hands. Let's be straight about that. And I think I'm right in saying that United Utilities have already said that they're going to be increasing dividends. We need to be making sure that it's not the public that pay. And for us in Wales in particular, where we have some of the highest bills, we have plentiful water, thank you very much, you know, which we should be able to use in order to keep bills down for people.
Right, is it time to look at nationalising the industry?
Jo, I think the thing that Rhyn overlooks is that the question of ownership is an obsession of putting more billions into a system by paying shareholders. What I'm most focused on, and what we're focused on as a government, is delivering the right outcome by the consumer. And that is fundamentally about blocking bonuses and dividends where there's persistent pollution. That's what we're doing, rather than obsessing over the question and technicality of ownership, which hasn't been shown to be correlated with actual outcomes.
But private ownership means private profit being taken out over the years, billions of pounds of it that could have gone into increasing
the Welsh Water example that Jo gave tells you otherwise, Reen.
We haven't seen the billions of pounds of investment. And we're calling for the full devolution and full control of water in Wales because we want to be able to use our natural resources. It's not right that people are paying the price for something that should have been invested in. And that we've
got to be honest with people. If you nationalised it, the government would have to borrow the money and have to pay that back in terms of interest. Companies that invest in this, if we expect them to invest, they're going to want a return on that investment because they borrow money too. There is no evidence that the government could do this more efficiently than the private sector. If you want to try and run that argument and delude people, there's a magic solution with the government doing this. And you tell me this, if you had the choice, that money, that investment that's needed, was it going to go into education or healthcare or cleaning up our water systems? What would it be? And that's where the public would have to understand exactly what your priorities
and government can borrow to invest too. And if you ask people, on the whole, I think they would tend to agree, as they do now on railways, that these crucial public services should be in public hands.
Well, they would have to. But you agree, you'd have to pay interest on the money you borrow to fix these problems.
I believe that the public should be able to make the right investments ourselves, and you do it in a way that doesn't allow increased dividends at a time when you're saying £10 a month increase in bills during a cost of living crisis.
This is not increased dividends. Be honest, it's not increased dividends.
We've already had one company saying they will.
Payback for the investment because it costs them money to borrow to invest.
Right, I feel this is an argument neither of you is going to persuade the other on, or not at this point. So let's pick up on the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves' speech on the economy yesterday. We talked about it in some depth, clearly about the push for growth. She's trying to get infrastructure built more cheaply and more quickly, and removing some of the environmental rules protecting, for example, bats and newts. Let's have a listen.
The problems in our economy, the lack of bold reform that we have seen over decades, can be summed up by a £100 million bat tunnel built for HS2. The type of decision that has made delivering major infrastructure in our country far too expensive and far too slow. So we are reducing the environmental requirements placed on developers when they pay into a nature restoration fund that we have created, so they can focus on getting things built and stop worrying about the bats and the newts.
Reeves yesterday. Let's talk to Richard Benwell from Wildlife and Countryside Link, which brings together environmental charities and organisations. Welcome to you, Richard. You heard Rachel Reeves saying we shouldn't worry about bats and newts. Do you agree?
Rachel Reeves has created an argument that doesn't need to happen. We absolutely see that there's loads of infrastructure that needs to be built. You just heard about some of it, the billions of pounds we need to upgrade our sewerage network and sort out all that pollution, the billions of pounds we need to invest in renewable energy, for example. But we can do that in a way that protects and restores nature. The Chancellor yesterday was confecting an argument out of the idea that it's bats and newts that stand in the way of development, when really so often it's things like lack of local authority spending, slow build-out rates from developers. It's not the bats and newts that are standing in the way of development. Right. And if the Chancellor proceeds down this route, she'll find that it's not just the people who care about bats and newts who are angry, it's the people who care about the chalk streams that these laws also protect, the people who care about the birds and the otters and the dormice and the wildflower meadows and all those brilliant things that make our country special. If she goes down this route of deregulating, then she'll be throwing away all the good work that her government has been doing about thinking about a more intelligent approach to planning that can help us restore nature at the same time.
Why should we be so worried about, let's take the example she used, bats and newts?
Well, these are precious species that are on the edge of survival in many cases, and they're protected for a reason. And it's when we arrive at a situation where wildlife is on the edge that the laws start to kick in. Think about things like river pollution. The reason that the laws kick in is because we've polluted our environment so much. And the laws that we're talking about here, the habitats regulations, have stood the test of time. We know they work. We know developers know how to work with them. And the simple knee-jerk reaction of stripping away laws isn't the way to go. We know we can improve the laws so that you're actually finding more space for nature.
Richard, we have guests here in the studio. Kanishka, perhaps you'd like to respond first of all that Rachel Reeves is confecting an argument here.
No, I don't think so at all. And Jo, I think the thing I'd say to Richard as well is the outcome you desire, Richard, which is an intelligent planning system, delivering homes for people who desperately need it, building lab capacity across this country so we can power innovation, getting data centres across our constituencies. That is an outcome that is consistent with protecting nature better. That is something I share with you, and I think the Chancellor does too. That is exactly what we're doing. This isn't about cutting out bats and newts from our wildlife. It's about better protecting them alongside building houses and labs, but getting rid of process and bureaucracy, which is currently harming both what Richard wants and what I want, which is good planning and good wildlife.
Richard, does that reassure you?
Well, if we heard a word about better protection, then that would be brilliant. And actually, the thing that the Chancellor was referring to yesterday, the Nature Restoration Fund, has had some really good ideas behind it from people like Matt Pennycook in the Housing Department. He's been working carefully, but the way the Chancellor described it was taking away laws, deregulating, and that's the opposite of what we need to do to better allocate the space we've got. Deregulating is just the silliest way to go about planning reform. What we need is to use our tiny island better so that we're getting more from nature and more from development at the same time.
Kanishka?
I think the big thing I'd say is we've all got to focus on what the Chancellor's delivered in terms of substance and outcomes. 2/3 of business leaders have today said they're going to invest more in Britain as a result of the Chancellor's speech. Just today. Britain is now second in the world for investability. We've already had wage growth fastest in the last 3 years. The outcomes that we're focused on, the Nature Restoration Fund that Richard is praising for this government, exactly what we're trying to do, putting nature as well as our growth at the heart of it.
And that's a ludicrous gloss on what's actually happened. I mean, Rachel Reeves has talked down the economy for 6 months, brought forward massive economic policies that will depress the economy in terms of tax rises, and red tape coming down the track. That's why she's had to come out yesterday with this speech, which is a complete panic in terms of
but do you welcome
growth that's been stalled. There's no doubt the environmental regulations are out of control. I mean, it's the bureaucracy around it. I think there are ways, as we've always argued, of making sure we protect the environment whilst we deliver new housing and new infrastructure. It can happen. But the report on Science World Sea, the environmental report, 44,000 pages. It is simple. There's too much bureaucracy. Well, it must be simplified. It used to take 2.5 years to get planning consent for a major project. Today it is 4.5 years. That can't be right.
But that highlights, doesn't it, Richard, the point made by Kevin Hollinrake here, that environmental policies or bureaucracy is out of control.
Well, everybody agrees that we can do these things better by improving clarity and making it clearer what you need from developers. I mean, there's 44,000 pages. Who wants that?
Exactly.
Who can possibly interpret that?
Think of the paper.
This is massive consultancy fees being whacked on desks to plough things through. And yes, we can make it clearer what we want from developers so that they're not squishing nature. And yes, we can make it so that you're not getting all these bureaucratic costs. But the idea that the way to do that is to do less planning and strip away rules is absurd. And we need to have the much better, more intelligent way of planning so that you can use our scarce land resource to deliver what these guys are talking about, which is green, wonderful homes that people want to live in, at the same time as not squandering the wonderfulness that so many people care about. And it's not just going to be a few people who are cross if the Chancellor goes ahead with this. It will be a huge proportion of our population who care about the future of our natural world.
I mean, Reen, do you agree with Richard that these two are consistent with each other, these two things, this economic growth and protecting wildlife without deregulating?
I think you can. I agree to an extent that we need to be sensible in how we enact sort of regulation and not hold back development in a way that is unnecessary. But I am very, very concerned at the dismissive tone of the Chancellor towards towards, in this case, newts and bats. You know, she's siding with sort of Trump on sort of culture war, environmental issues here, really, in that sort of use of language.
So is it just tone, then?
But we've been invited, haven't we, here by Ryan, to concentrate on the substance. And you know what? I'm looking at this from a Welsh angle as the leader of Plaid Cymru, and I see a political party deciding for the next decades that, other than the Old Trafford development, they're going to be pumping all that investment into the already richest part of the UK. There's nothing here for Wales.
Levelling
what does that tell?
Or Scotland,
or Scotland, or the northeast of England.
Yeah.
What does that tell you about Labour and their view towards fair distribution?
What does it say? I mean,
Look, Joe,
levelling up's been dumped.
I think the problem, Joe, is because Reen's obsessed with trying to fly...
With Wales.
We're trying to shut borders.
You can't criticise him for that.
Making Wales poorer is what he's obsessed with.
I don't want to shut borders.
Kevin, let me just finish for a second.
Making Wales poorer by
Joe,
not having investment.
Well,
let him finish.
If you let me speak, Reen, because he only focuses on independence as his obsession, he doesn't focus on what I and the government focus on, which is the prosperity of Wales.
OK, talk to me about the prosperity of the north.
The biggest funding settlement for Wales, an M4 corridor thriving as a consequence of airport expansion, Cardiff Airport, flying the flag for Wales and welcoming the expansion of Heathrow as well.
Northern Powers
it's fantastic for Wales, and I wish he'd acknowledge it.
You put Northern Powers Rail on ice. Yeah. That's the most important railway project, connectivity project in the north. Levelling up has been dumped under your watch.
Absolutely untrue. Well, Kevin, you failed to deliver any of it, so give us a little bit of type.
600 billion spent in the last Parliament.
Unfunded spending.
Kevin, do you really think Levelling Up was a success? It was actually completed in the way that Boris Johnson imagined it. The right ambition, yeah.
What we got wrong is we didn't explain how long it would take. It would take 30 years. But dumping those projects, Northern Powers Rail, is an absolute tragedy and travesty.
Right. Well, let me get to Dawn. Back to the substance, because you will have seen images, the bats and the newts. You will have seen images, I think we showed them in the headlines, of those bat tunnels. And people will say, is that money well spent? In fact, we can see it here. This is a bat tunnel, and it is quite a big construction. It would be if it was built, when it is built, and it's extremely long as well, and it costs a lot of money. But you've heard what Richard said in terms of the numbers of people who would be cross, upset, if wildlife is squandered at the same time as trying to develop infrastructure.
Indeed. Look, I mean, it's not an easy thing, a decision, is it? Because there is a limited amount of money, evidently. So
would you dump the bats and newts?
Well, no, I'd maybe less of a tunnel. But the thing I'm confused about here is when they were in opposition, both Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer objected to airport extension. Keir Starmer objected to the third runway at Heathrow, and Rachel Reeves herself objected to the Leeds-Bradford extension. So suddenly they cared about bats and newts then, but they don't now.
Well, I mean, that's because of the push for growth. Everything's up for grabs, Ganishka.
Joe, we're in an economic crisis in this country. Prosperity and growth.
You created
it, Kevin. I can't believe this gentleman in the President Department who sunk the economy is sitting here.
I can't believe a clever guy will actually say that with a straight face. It's complete nonsense.
Kevin,
doing a good job
can you
between the two of your parties.
Kevin has not a single fact in his mind. All he can talk about is the ambitions and ideas.
That's quite sweeping, Ganishka, to say he hasn't got one.
The fastest growing economy in the G7.
I think you can. The worst productivity.
Don't talk over each other, just for the audience. But yes, those growth figures though came at the very end of 14 years of very stagnant growth.
COVID crisis, cost of living crisis. You see where this economy was 2 years ago. Inflation at 11%. Forecast to go into recession. When they took over, below 2% inflation, and the economy was going fastest in the G7. Those are your facts.
Let's go back to Richard. Listening to this discussion and debate, do you think environmentalists like you are going to, or are, losing the battle in terms of the sorts of protections you want to see continued?
No. I think the awakening of environmental passion amongst the public is really, really clear. And what we need is for the politicians to catch up. And just listening to the conversation about growth there, I'm struck that yet again, we're being drawn into short-termism and frankly mortgaging the future for a short political economic hit when we know that looking after our natural environment is fundamental to the future of the economy. We know that investing in this kind of natural infrastructure we need up and down the country is a great way to start to spread out that economic benefit, whether it's forestry in the north or wildlife-friendly farming in the east. And tone really matters on this stuff. The government said before the election that it would achieve growth at the same time as that historic promise to halt the decline of wildlife by 2030. My question right now for all the politicians here is, do you still hold true to those promises that you made to the electorate before the general election, that you're intending to look after the future of our economy at the same time as stopping the terminal decline of our wildlife? And that's something that we all want to see happen, and we think it can.
Well, you're nodding away. Do you want to respond?
I don't think the two things are mutually exclusive. I think you can grow the economy and protect the environment, but you've got to do it in a simplified way. It's too complicated, too bureaucratic.
Kanishka?
Well, absolutely, Richard, and we have a shared ambition. I think you'd agree spending 100 million on a bat tunnel is not the right choice in making that ambition true. We want to work together with you and everyone else who shares a love of nature as well as a deep desire for prosperity.
Reen?
I think we can and must do both.
But there hasn't been growth, has there? I mean, there may have been protections for wildlife.
And we've had a really good example here from the two main parties of why both of them have been failing the people that I represent in Wales. And I genuinely believe that you can do both. But we cannot cast our environment aside as we seek to create that prosperity, which I'm confident that we can.
OK. Richard Benwell, thank you very much for joining us, because we're going to talk about this headline that's just appeared. New oil and gas field consent was unlawful, says the judge. Yes, this is the court that has ruled that consent for the two new Scottish oil and gas fields was granted unlawfully, and their owners must seek fresh approval from the UK government before production can begin. Now, if I remember rightly, in the campaign and before the election, Labour said that they wouldn't approve any new oil and gas exploration. And this is in Rosebank. Now, it was approved. Well, now it's been overruled. What is the government and what should the government do?
Joe, I think the overarching principle here is we want an orderly, stable transition away from oil and gas towards a prosperous economy and decent jobs focused on future technology. On a specific question that you've raised, where we've got a consultation out at the moment to review how we get the process right in making that judgment. But the big picture is we're transitioning the UK into the future, and that's the right thing. Right,
so you might approve new oil and gas, which it will be, if it's going through a review, which you said you wouldn't do.
Joe, I think that, I'm not preempting any particular decisions, but the overall election commitment will be made, and the principle on which we're making every decision is a proper transition away from where we've been historically into the future of climate technology.
Should that consent? Should that consent be given?
Of course it should. We need the gas. All Kanishka is going to argue, effectively arguing for, is importing more gas because we need the gas, and we'll need the gas for at least another 3 decades. That's the reality. Whatever transition happens, we should produce our own gas. It should not be imported, so we've got to approve those licences.
Right. Well, yeah. Do you agree with that, Reen? I mean, you might as well have it from a British oil field rather than one abroad.
I think it's pretty clear that the investment needs to go into that renewable technology that will be the basis of energy policy in the future.
Would you say yes to the exploration of this oil field, or two of them? In fact?
No, I don't think that's where we need to be at this point in time. And we need to see an acceleration in those elements, especially offshore wind, where we know that there's so much as yet untapped potential, including to benefit the Welsh economy, of course, which is why we want the devolution of the Crown Estate.
What do we do when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow? There's too much...
OK, well, I'm a big supporter of hydrogen investment so that you can store that energy
and
release it.
What about nuclear?
Green hydrogen.
You've obviously stood on both sides of the argument.
And I'm very...
any clarity.
And I'm very...
The reality is...
And I'm very interested in the way that
let him answer.
I'm very interested in the way that nuclear can fit into that green debate about the production of low energy.
Right. Would you say yes? Do you think the politicians should say yes to Rosebank exploration?
Look, at the moment, we've already discussed water bills. People are going to struggle with their water bills. People are going to struggle with their energy bills. And Labour are talking about, on one hand, expanding Heathrow, the most sort of carbon-creating thing you can possibly do with more jets thundering in, at the same time as making people pay more for fuel that is probably imported and also destroying the environment. I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense.
All right, well, let's talk about second homes and council tax, because from April, councils in England will be able to charge up to double in council tax bills for second homes. In Wales, councils have been able to charge double for second homes since 2017 and up to 4 times more since 2023. Let's speak to Era Harris, who's 77 and whose family has owned a bungalow in Pembrokeshire, South Wales, since the 1950s and are now fighting a council tax bill of almost £4,000. Ira, tell us a little bit about your situation.
This is a chalet shed shack on Puppet Sands, North Pembrokeshire. It's not habitable, according to the Welsh Assembly's fitness of homes for human habitation, because it has no toilet or bathroom. But they insist it's a second home. It's not even a first home. There are exemptions, but being not habitable is not an exemption. Seasonal homes have an exemption when they can be empty for 2 months or so, but this was brought in as a planning condition in 1947, and our bung is pre-war.
I mean, we've been looking at pictures of your home there, your shed, a hut, whatever you want to call it. I mean, the Welsh Government says the measure is needed to make it easier for local people to buy affordable homes where they grew up. What do you say to them?
Well, it's not habitable. We offered it when the Ukrainian refugees came, and it was turned down. I see what was behind it, but this isn't Tenby, this isn't Newport Pem, this is Puppet Sands. It hasn't. We can't rent it out long-term, short-term, and it would have to be knocked down for anyone to live in it.
Right. I mean, Ira, do you think it's a good idea in principle, increasing council tax for people with second homes? You obviously have a particular situation with your home shed there, and so you'd like the rules more strictly drawn so it doesn't capture people like you. But broadly, do you support the principle?
No, I don't. I think Pembrokeshire or Wales are shooting themselves in the foot. Pembrokeshire depends on tourism and agriculture, of which we have interest in both. And it's not getting our little towns anywhere. The visitors we depend on, we're always very happy when they go back in October. But no, I don't agree with it.
No.
No.
All right, well, Ira,
I can see where they're coming from, and
Yes.
I know they need all the money they can get.
Yes.
But personally, we fall through the net of this.
Yes, well,
it's a grey area.
Yes, I can see how your particular situation falls through the net. But we have Reen Apyorweth here. What do you say, Reen? Because even in principle, Ira doesn't really believe this is a good policy when you think of tourism.
I think I'm not going to be dismissive of Ira's case, because it's a very specific case, and actually councils do have discretionary powers. I think it's really, really important to differentiate between tourism and second home ownership. Tourism is very, very important to places like Pembrokeshire and to the constituency that I represent, the Ynys Môn, the Isle of Anglesey, one of the areas most dependent on tourism. Second home ownership is not tourism, and tourism businesses, holiday lets, which are an important part of our tourism offer, if they can reach a threshold of number of nights let each year, they're able to opt out of council tax anyway into the business rates regime.
It's a lot of nights, though, isn't it, as I understand it?
Yes, and there's a debate to be had around that. It was 70 nights a year, which is clearly far too low. It went up to 182. There's an argument that maybe around the 150 mark might be a little bit fairer. We can always tweak, but there's a really important principle here, that what we're trying to do is to protect the local housing market. And for so many years, people have been far, far too relaxed about allowing the slippage of homes that people should be able to aspire to live in. And that, as a part of a suite of measures, and it's not just the premium, by the way, all sorts of planning elements as well, we're now finally getting to grips with the issue, and it's starting to have some positive impacts.
I'm just going to say, there are other options you could do. I mean, sort of like, you could blame the locals for selling their homes to people coming in from outside the area. Have you thought about stopping them doing that?
OK, it's an argument that some people put forward, and if you look to the sort of Guernsey model, where you have sort of two different prices, one for the local market and one for people wanting to move in from outside, that's quite difficult to implement. I don't think we can start blaming people who sell their homes. You put your house on the market and you need to move somewhere, somebody comes in and buys it. That's the way the housing market works. But it's been too easy for people to buy a home effectively not costing them anything. You buy a second home, you let it a few weeks a year, and it makes enough to pay for your mortgage. I remember being called into a coffee morning kitchen by some ladies who said, "Trine, we've got to sort out the red bins issue in Trosneigr." What they meant was they were seeing the proliferation of red bins, marking properties out as being second homes. Those properties were not paying council tax. because they were able previously to opt out, it was a loophole.
Well,
we persuaded government to close that loophole, and that's what...
Let me get...
that's
Ira,
another part of
what
the
do you think of what
toolbox.
you've heard from Reen?
Second homes employ lots of people in the area to paint or to fix, and second homes can be let for tourism. So, and surely people are allowed to buy a, you can buy a second home, and now it's going up 300%.
There's no ban.
It's getting silly.
Well,
but we, personally, we can't make money to pay our council tax out of the property. We have to go round the family gathering the money for the extra tax.
Right. Well, Ira, thank you very much for joining us, because we're going to talk about England in terms of the authorities here. But do you broadly support the idea, by the way, of council tax going up, Kevin?
Listen, communities are really important. I represent a beautiful area of England where many people come to spend time there, and many people have second homes, and I don't want to see villages hollowed out by them all being owned by second home owners. So there are ways of dealing with that without sticking taxes up. A local connection test, we're doing that, so that the planning powers are available to local authorities.
This is a Conservative policy. It was designed by Michael Gove, wasn't it, in England?
That local connection test has been in place for a long time.
Right, but the idea that the authorities in England will be able to double or to was Michael Gove's idea.
In terms of taxation, it should not be an excuse just to raise taxes generally. If you increase council tax...
But we are talking about council tax.
Well, exactly. If you increase council tax, it should be spent on affordable homes for local people in those areas.
Right, well, this headline here, coastal towns to share £3 million from tax on second homes. This is great. Yarmouth Borough Council, West Norfolk Council and North Norfolk District Council set to benefit from a share of nearly £3 million from the change, which will go towards affordable housing and homelessness services. So you back that, but not the ability to...
Listen, it's a council's choice. I have mixed feelings whether it's the right choice in North Yorkshire, because North Yorkshire has done a similar thing. But if they raise the money in that way, it should not be there for general taxation. Right. It must go to providing affordable
So was it wrong
homes.
of Michael Gove to give authorities in England the freedom to do this, to up council tax?
I believe in freedom, actually. It's local decision makers have got them the choice to make. But my point is, if they're going to do this, provide the affordable homes to local people.
Do you support it? I mean, it was a policy brought in by Michael Gove. Do you support it?
Jo, it's amazing to see that Kevin and his Conservatives have found second homes on the opposition benches. I'm glad it's treating them well. But let me say this. I absolutely support the principle that has been tested out in Welsh contexts already. Wow. It makes a huge difference in places like Barry, where kids growing up, going back to visit their grandparents, unable to buy houses and live near them. Except
Pembrokeshire Council, where Ira lives, have reduced their second home premium from 200 to 150% just 6 months after it was introduced, because a glut of homes were being sold, second homes were being sold, and there are anecdotal reports that the sort of money that Ira was talking about, employment, etc., has gone down.
So the really important principle here, Jo, is of discretion for the fabric of the community and the voice of the community to be put first. If Pembrokeshire decides it's not the right thing in the particular context, that's for them to decide, because the ultimate principle is the voice and the fabric of our communities being protected. That's what it's about. It might not be the right thing in every local authority. It probably will be in some, and I'm really glad that some of them have been able to raise money to put back into those communities.
Right, if North Yorkshire, which is a very pretty part of the country, if the local authority decided to whack up council tax by 100, 200%, what would your reaction be?
As I said before, that's a choice they've got to make, and we want to give them freedom to make their decisions as they see fit. As I say, that money should be ring-fenced for providing local affordable homes for local people. That's got to be the right thing. It should not be there as an opportunity just to raise tax generally.
Right. I mean, just for your information, second homes for sale trebled after council tax hike. 135 Pembrokeshire second homes were on the market in July compared to 38 the previous year. So I suppose it is working to some extent.
And as I say, we're seeing the evidence that people are making different choices about whether to have a second home. You know, we want people to come and spend their money in areas that are beautiful and that can benefit from tourism. That doesn't mean mean people having to have a second home.
Let's talk about immigration. This BBC News headline, net migration could push UK population to 72.5 million, according to the Office for National Statistics. It was published earlier this week. There are projections from the ONS saying that the UK population will grow by just over 7% between 2022 and 2032, reaching the figure you can see there, and it'll be driven by levels of immigration. The Prime Minister was asked about this at PMQs yesterday. Let's have a look.
My constituents in Romford are shocked, angry and dismayed by the suggestion by the ONS that the population of this country will rise to 72.5 million by 2032. Mr. Speaker, that's 500,000 people a year, which is unsustainable. Who voted for that? And will the government do something to ensure that the population of this country is sustainable going forward? Because there is no mandate for such a colossal increase in immigration in this country.
I think he should talk to his leader. Because net migration went through the roof under the last government, nearly 1 million, quadrupled. And who was cheering it on? Who was cheering it on? The leader of the opposition.
Dawn, should politicians allow the UK population to reach that projected figure of 72.5 million over the next few years or not?
Only if they allow the infrastructure to increase with it. I mean, with hospitals, with education. I mean, there are so many... I mean, people can't get a hospital appointment, you can't get a dental appointment. People are struggling to get into schools in some area, whereas other areas have a lack of pupils. So at the moment, I think that there has to be some net cap on migration. There really has to be. We just can't allow it to continue as it is because the country just can't cope.
What sort of cap would you put on it? I mean, perhaps not a precise number, but Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the opposition, hasn't put a precise number on it yet, but says she wants the levels to come down. What sort of cap are you talking about?
Well, I'm talking about the cap that means the people that we have coming here are the people we need in this country to do the jobs that we haven't filled. That's the sort of cap I'm talking about. As you say, numbers are... It's a changing situation. The other situation, Joe, is that we've got an ageing population as well. So it's migration is actually going to be the one thing increasing the population.
I mean, Irene, the Labour government has said that immigration levels are staggeringly high and need to be cut substantially. Do you agree with that?
It's interesting hearing Labour talking the language of the Conservatives on immigration. We've been talking...
Well, except they were at their highest levels under the Conservatives and net migration, which may be a good thing, but they did reach their record high then.
We started this programme talking about growth, and growth in the economy will necessitate a growth in the population. And I'm interested in the use of language by the Romford MP there, talking about the need for a sustainable population. Well, a sustainable population also needs a greater birth rate. And you know, a two-child benefit cap isn't a particular help when it comes to trying to encourage a greater birth rate in the UK, which is necessary. But we also have to be realistic that the growth in the economy will also have to be accompanied by bringing people in. And only yesterday, Cardiff University announced that they were consulting on cutting 400 academic jobs. And one of the biggest elements driving that was the changes in visas, which has led to a big decrease in the number of foreign students coming to study in Cardiff and in the UK as a whole.
Well,
the impacts of decisions taken by UK government, the last Conservative government in particular, have consequences, and we saw that in Cardiff yesterday.
I mean, what do you say? The Conservative government did preside over record net migration figures, which, as I say, may be a positive thing, but it wasn't what the government actually said it wanted to do. How did it happen? How did you reach, I think, 906,000? That was at its peak, net migration, on your watch.
We got it wrong. That's what happened. We couldn't control migration until 2020. For 2 years after, there was zero net migration. What you saw the year after that, we saw Ukraine and Hong Kong and Afghanistan. Who would refuse those people's entry to the UK? The year after that, the visa regulations, the visa criteria were wrong. Totally wrong. This party is under new leadership now. Kimi Badenoch's been very clear. We've already made restrictions in terms of visas, so that number's come down by a third already. It needs to come way below the figures it is, and so that 72.5 million is. There's no way in the world we should let our population grow to that level. And I disagree with Rin. There are other ways to grow the economy other than simply importing more people, because it's not just about infrastructure. It's not just about hospitals. It's about our communities, our ability to absorb new populations from different cultures. This has to be managed properly.
Right, you say it has to be managed properly, and you say that the last Conservative government got it wrong. What do you mean they got it wrong? Was it carelessness? Incompetence? Should you not have allowed people to come from Ukraine and from Hong Kong?
No, exactly. Of course we shouldn't. But
how do you manage it then?
Because the area where we got it wrong was the visa criteria. We were letting people in who had
to work in care homes, to work that we needed.
The minimum salary levels were too low. The 26,000. We raised them to 38,000. Labour put them back to 26,000. So we got that level of salary cap wrong. We also let people bring dependents with the visa, both in students and healthcare workers, which we changed as well. That's where we got it wrong.
Right. Well, Kanishka, but you've just heard from Reen the impact of those changes that were brought in and maybe changed then by the Labour government. What will you do about sectors like the care sector and universities?
Well, Jo, two things. One, a diagnosis of the number that we're talking about. That number doesn't account for recent changes or future changes. It's based on the Boris wave, if people call it, that Kevin and others presided over. And what we're doing is changing that. And so our hope would be to be in a different context. To your particular question on sectors, what we need fundamentally is, in the long term, a focus on skills in this country. If we can skill our own people up to be able to look after each other better, to be able to build jobs of the future better, that's going to be a big part of it. But of course, we'll need a degree of migration to support us in the core sectors. My fundamental pitch is the Migration Advisory Committee has now been tasked by the government, and I know the Home Secretary will be doing more announcements on this. It's been tasked to make sure that the shortage occupation list is better suited to the demands of our economy, much tighter than it was historically.
Which ones should come off the shortage occupation list?
You know, Jo, one of the things I feel fundamentally is this is not really about politicians standing up, making promises they fall on. This is about experts on the economy.
It's about your decisions.
It's about experts in the economy. It's about experts in, well, your wrong decisions.
I'm willing to take it.
Kevin, you've got to learn to stop
I'm willing to take responsibility.
But it's fundamentally about experts looking at the economy, tightening the scope of what we're doing in terms of
But no one can
shortage
tell me
occupation
how
lists.
they're going to tighten it.
Well, I can tell you. And
well, it was huge, the shortage occupation list.
What Kanisha's got to answer is why you reduced the salary cap threshold from 38,000 down to 26,000.
Well, let me answer that
Why
directly.
did you do that?
Let me take that head on.
Yeah.
Two things, Jo. One, in terms of sectors, I have seen contexts on the shortage occupation list, especially in aspects of hospitality and restaurants, where I feel we could have done a better job than not including them on the list. Secondly, to Kevin's particular question on income levels, I've had a number of British constituents born and brought up here, marrying someone in America, for example, not able to bring their partner here because of the low-wage, low-skill economy they presided over. That is not fair. We don't have to give up on compassion to build competence into the immigration system. We can do much better.
So you agree you will see much higher migration, a salary cap of 26 than you would at 38?
No, net migration is the number. They brought it to 1 million. We're bringing it down.
Right. I mean, Dawn, what do you think of what you've heard from the politicians?
Well, again, I'm just thinking, like, you know, like the readers of our newspapers would. You know, you talk about compassion. What about the compassion here for people that are struggling to get hospital appointments, are struggling to get dental appointments, are struggling to get on the housing ladder, are struggling to find homes? What about them? We're not looking after them.
We've got to put them first, and that's exactly why.
It really sounds like you are, though.
But Dawn, that's exactly what we're doing. If you look at illegal immigration, which has also put pressures, we've returned 16,400 people. Record. 5 years in a row, and so as a consequence
that's not legal migration.
But it's not, and the numbers are far bigger. And just to say,
both fronts, legal and illegal, tackle the skills thing on the legal front, build our own people's skill base up, invest in infrastructure. That's the way to solve it in the long term. But yes, of course, you've got to build faith in the illegal side.
Look at Keir Starmer's answer to that question, though. A fair question about people are worried about this. What's he say? Well, talk to the opposition leader. He's in government now. It's your choices. You've raised that. You've lowered that salary cap, which will mean more migration. Stand up for your choices. They're your decisions.
But Kevin,
you're in government.
Kevin, how many times did successive Conservative governments pledge to bring down net migration to tens of thousands? And you've never, ever met it. does that show that it's not possible?
No, it does not show that. I say it wasn't possible to put those rules in place before 2020. We have done since. We got the rules wrong in 2023, 24. We changed them, and Labour are easing those laws to make those rules to make it easier to come to the UK.
Totally false.
Right. I mean, do you think it's desirable to bring down levels of net migration by that much?
I agree with what Dawn said, that you have to make sure that the infrastructure that we have in Wales, the rest of the UK, is able to cope with the numbers of the population. But let's be straight here. Where there's pressure on the health system, it's not because of immigration, it's because of the deep inequalities that we have in the UK, where the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer.
On that note, we don't have time for any more. Unfortunately, I'll let them chat after the programme. I'll be back on Monday with more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and the iPlayer.